Hello and welcome. This is a presentation of the Tennessee Tiered Support Center on high-impact, low-intensity strategies for supporting student behavior. We shared this information at the 2025 Tennessee Department of Education SPED Summit, and now we're sharing that information again with you. Here's a brief disclaimer about the use of generative AI tools. And here's a little information about the Tennessee Technical Assistance Network. The Tennessee Tiered Support Center is a technical assistance provider funded by the state of Tennessee, and we are a partner of the Tennessee Technical Assistance Network, or the TIN-10 network. Our services are designed to build district and school capacity to build and implement your response to instruction and intervention for academic and behavior framework, and that RTI squared A plus RTI squared B framework is the state's multi-tiered framework for academic and behavior supports. The learning objectives for today's sessions are to understand the importance of integrating those universal strategies that foster supportive relationships and create positive, safe, and predictable learning spaces for multi-tiered framework and for responsive student support. To identify those low-intensity strategies that empower our students to access Tier 1 instruction fully, and to differentiate between those preventative and those reactive behavior support strategies, and generate recommendations that promote safe and predictable learning spaces. If you'd like to access our spotlighted resources, I'm going to give you a moment to scan this QR code. It will take you to a folder under a system called Box. It's an online learning platform. And if you can just quickly create a free account, you'll be able to access all of the materials in that folder, and we will be sharing those throughout today's recorded session. All right, so hopefully you've had time to scan that QR code, but we'll be showing them each time I share a resource. So now we're going to dig right in, and we're going to start talking about understanding tiered supports. So what are tiered supports? I want you to think about Tier 1 in the broader context. In the broader context of a tiered support system, we can use those prevention-focused, low-intensity strategies to teach students their expected behaviors so that we can create conditions that reinforce the behaviors we want to see in our students that lead to greater learning and better student outcomes. Let's think about it a little more. So what is a tiered system of support? A tiered system of support is that prevention-focused approach, right? So prevention instead of reaction. So we're working on preventing problem behaviors and challenging behaviors before they start and before they intensify. And using a tiered system of support with a prevention-focused approach is going to improve, right, the outcome of all students. Also, a tiered system of support is going to provide your data team and your school and your leadership a conceptual framework for systematically identifying and addressing the needs that exist in our students through instruction and intervention provided at an appropriately matched intensity for that student. A tiered system of support is also a place where our educators, our data team continuously monitor student progress using multiple data sources. And they use those data sources to evaluate the effectiveness, right, of our instruction and intervention so that we can optimize its impact. Let's think about that all under the response to instruction and intervention for academics and behavior framework, RTI squared A plus RTI squared B. Remember, that's Tennessee's approach to a tiered student support system. So RTI squared A plus RTI squared B involves aligning separate siloed systems and practices that support both students' academic and non-academic needs. It is characterized by supportive leadership, intentional assessment, collaborative database decision-making, and research-based instruction and intervention that work together to support students' holistic and diverse needs. And the things that I just described are summarized in the visual as essential components for all tiers under this framework. I also want you to think about, based on the triangle and the gradient of colors, moving from all to some to few students with our increased supports for students moving up along the triangle, that educators provide universal tier 1 instruction and supports to all students in our building. And that is a really important place for us to focus our efforts, because it's the most efficient place for us to support our students. And it's a place where we can really focus on that proactive support for our students and that preventative support for our students. And then for students who are identified with risk and greater needs, educators can provide those targeted tier 2 supports and more intensive instruction intervention in those more intense tiers. I want you to notice that in our triangle, we don't have clear lines delineating a separation between tier 1 and tier 2 and tier 2 and tier 3. And that's because, based on the context and need of individual students, we can escalate and increase intensity of supports for students in a differentiated way, instead of considering only gates or hard and fast data points and cut scores and lines for when a student needs escalated supports. So we're going to focus on tier 1 in this presentation, but it's important for you to keep in mind that tier 1 is a part of that larger system, right? Where leadership, assessment, database decision-making, and instruction intervention are interconnected, and they're also constant across our tiers. Let's take a moment and focus on the area of database decision-making. So across tiers, school data teams and schools make decisions about the support students need and the effectiveness of that support using an iterative database decision-making process. And they use a variety of data at all decision points. The same process is used to make decisions about academics and behavior support needs for our students. And at tier 1, our aggregate student data is used to inform decisions about core instruction and universal supports for all students. I want you to look at the areas and the cyclical nature of the database decision-making process. It begins with defining the needs that we have by looking at a variety of data to understand student performance in comparison to goals and areas of need. Next, our team would analyze data, where they gather and examine student data to create a comprehensive profile for that student performance that's going to illustrate both strengths for the student and areas of need. Next, that data team is going to work on implementing supports by creating and executing a plan for supporting defined areas of need. And then the final step of database decision-making is evaluating, right, those efforts by determining if the plan of support was effective in addressing the need. And again, at all of these points, we're going to use multiple data sources. So here are some example tier 1 data sources. And as we look at these, I want you to think about, what data sources have you been involved in collecting and analyzing and evaluating when you're considering student supports? So at each decision point in our database decision-making, schools need to use those multiple data sources, right, to evaluate and make instructional decisions for tier 1 academic and behavior core instruction. Here are some examples of data that can be helpful to you and to your school data team. Remember, this list isn't exhaustive. There may be other sources of data that your school or that you look at as a teacher. I want you to look across the list and, again, just reflect on which data sources you are using or are familiar with, and then think about which data sources have you not considered and which data sources could help you when you're looking at needs that exist in your classroom, in your grade level, and at your school. This presentation is going to focus on tier 1, And that's because teaching and reinforcing school-appropriate behaviors is going to empower our students to access Tier 1 instruction fully. And remember, Tier 1 serves all students. Also, Tier 1 is that place where we as educators can provide low-intensity strategies that support those strong relationships with educators and with peers and create positive, safe, and predictable learning spaces for all of our students. And focusing on Tier 1 is going to create a mindset that prioritizes those data-driven decisions and continuous improvement of student support through that larger tiered system. So now we're going to talk about teaching those school-appropriate behaviors and how important that is to helping make sure that our students are able to enact and demonstrate the behaviors that we need to see that lead to success for our students. So let's take a moment and think about expectations. So look at the graphic, look at the visual. We have a line that is straight. It starts at one point and it goes to the next point. That's our expectation. And then we have our other visual for real life. I want you to think about how often the expectations that we have possibly mirror what we see in the real life visual at the bottom. I think it's universal to say that often our expectations are all over the place. And they're all over the place because real life doesn't go as planned. In the classroom, our behavior expectations need to be as clear for students as possible so that they are able to demonstrate those expectations. I want you to think about all of the reasons that students in a classroom, in a school, might not be able to demonstrate the behaviors that we expect them to demonstrate. It could be that those behaviors are, the expectation for those behaviors are invisible. And that means that we haven't explicitly shared with them what we want to see yet. It could be that those behavior expectations are unclear and that we are teaching expectations in unplanned or possibly in inconsistent ways, or that we're simply just telling students what we want to see, but we're not showing students and letting them enact it and practice it. It can also just be as innocent as simple, right? As students have forgotten the behavior expectation. Maybe there's been a break, maybe there's been a summer vacation, and when students come back, they've forgotten those expectations. And that could happen because we only teach those expectations once, but then we forget that we need to reteach them and reinforce them throughout the school year in order for those expectations to carry across the entire school year. So what I want you to think about is how we often have an expectation or vision for how our students should behave. And then, by the way, we even have expectations around for how adults should behave. But we can become disappointed or frustrated when real life doesn't match our expectation, and when those expectations aren't demonstrated by our students. But a common reason for those unmet expectations is really because they're invisible, they're unclear, and they're forgotten by students. So what can we do in response to this? It's important that we have school-wide behavior expectations. School-wide behavior expectations are used to establish, right, those common values critical to educational success. Expectations for behavior must be defined, taught, and supported so that they can become visible and clear and easy for everyone. And that includes, by the way, our students, our staff, and our families, and our caregivers to remember. So to promote a positive teaching and learning environment, schools and classroom teachers can create a set of universal school-wide expectations or norms that reflect the shared values of the school community. Let's look at some characteristics of school-wide expectations. So first of all, they reflect the culture and perspective of all of the students, families, and staff in our building. They're developmentally appropriate for the age of our students. They are positively stated. They are easy to remember. That means they're brief. They support the development and the maintenance of those positive relationships. And then also they're applied equally to all of our staff and students. Once we establish those school-wide expectations, it's critical that they are taught. And not just that they're taught passively, but they're taught explicitly so that all of our students have the opportunity to understand and practice those expectations and those norms for learning. I want you to think about teaching behavior and behavior expectations the same way you think about teaching academic skills. And the word I want you to think about is the teaching needs to be explicit. You will deliberately teach and reteach those expectations by providing the students the rationale, by explaining why this behavior is important, by using examples and non-examples in your rationale, in your explanation, and in your model, and give students ample opportunities to physically practice those behaviors and to receive immediate feedback about their practice. When you see the cycle of explain, model, practice, and provide feedback, this should feel very similar to the gradual release method of I do, we do, you do that you would apply to many academic skills in the classroom. And remember that this cycle, we don't have to just do this once when teaching expected behaviors. We can reteach using this cycle our behavior expectations and rules throughout the year. We can do this after break times and when data indicates that certain behaviors are problematic. We can also reteach when new students join the class. Here is an example of a behavior expectation matrix that can be used to communicate and define those behaviors expected across our school and in specific classroom settings. So this matrix is specific to a classroom. You'll see across the top that this example of a classroom matrix is going to align with school-wide expectations of be respectful, be responsible, and safe. And then in the blue, we're going to see those areas in the class, those times of the lesson that would transition. And we're seeing these specific areas defined as, commonly occurring classroom activities. And underneath are those behaviors, those specific positive stated behaviors that are going to help students understand and help us narrow and be more explicit in defining to students what behaviors we need to see so that we can have that success occur in the classroom. I want you to think about in your classroom, which of these would be most useful? What areas are most clear to your students? It might be most clear how students should maybe be responsible, for example, during whole class activities, but it might be unclear to students how to be responsible during small group activities or during transitions. This is where it's going to be very useful for you as a teacher to really think about the data that you're getting from students and just the feedback that you're getting in your lessons about when behaviors are spiking during a lesson and during the week in your class. And that'll help you focus on teaching and reteaching those more narrow behaviors that you see on this matrix. This is an additional example, and this is how a behavior expectation matrix could be used to teach self-regulation in a classroom. And we know that self-regulation skills are those skills that are necessary for all students and are particularly important for students who have experienced trauma. So again, when you think about in the gray area and down on the, I believe it's my left-hand column, We see be respectful, be responsible, be safe. So those are those school-wide expectations. And then across the top, we have classroom activities, but we have a very specific column for when I feel upset. And you're going to see those self-regulation skills narrowed and defined in this column, but then also sprinkled throughout each activity. So we see a lot of prompts about using kind and appropriate language, allowing others to focus on learning, giving others space, apologize for mistakes. And look at this one, talk to a trusted adult, be safe under when I feel upset. So here's a way that we can take a matrix that's being used to teach behavior, to teach those softer skills that we may not have traditionally thought about on an expectation matrix, or when we're teaching classroom expectations and classroom behaviors. It's a way to keep things fresh and keep things applicable to the needs that you're seeing with your students in your classroom. Also, teaching behavior can and should include explicitly teaching those routines for common challenging situations. So a routine, right, is a sequence of activities or procedures that frequently occur in a classroom. Those clear, well-taught routines are going to prevent those situationally inappropriate behaviors that occur in situations that we can predict will be challenging to students. So as those routines develop, you can start to think about a teaching sequence that will help, similar to a task analysis, students understand the steps they need to take to accomplish that routine, to prevent that frustration, and to prevent those inappropriate behaviors that we are beginning to see happen during that common routine. Here is an example of a routine for a daily activity. This is the daily activity, right? It happens every day, every block, the start of every lesson. We have that entering the classroom routine, and that involves multiple steps. There's not just one step to entering the classroom. So entering quietly, turning in your homework, making sure your name is on it right, making sure things are turned into the appropriate place. In this case, it's a basket, going to your seat, and then getting started on work. So when you're looking at this example, I want you to think about, for example, in your classroom, or if you're supporting or observing a student, what are areas where we would commonly see frustration or inappropriate behaviors, right? It might be at going to your seat, it might be at beginning work. Those are places where we're going to want to hone in and focus and explicitly teach those areas of the routine in order to prevent those difficult problems that can arise when a group of students possibly, for example, stop going to their seat or don't get started at work promptly and working on the items that are on the board. And that's just going to create a more well-orchestrated routine, and it's going to make it easier for all of your students to meet expectations. So to wrap up this section, I want to share that we have a classroom routines and procedures checklist. And that checklist is inside of the folder that we shared earlier with the QR code. And I'll share that again at the end of this recording. This checklist can be used to identify classroom routines that may benefit from well-defined and well-taught procedures. And if you want help with this, I would download it, take a look at it, and consider how you can use it in your classroom and how it might benefit spending some time thinking about the routines and procedures in your class. Another resource that we have is the Classroom Routines and Procedures tool. So this is a tool that you can use to outline and create those clear procedural steps for the completion of a routine. It's just a space for you to think about the activity that you want to define further with procedural steps and think about the goal of that routine, and then a place to define each of those steps in the procedure. And then you can get to the teaching part of it. Next, we are going to talk about acknowledging school appropriate behaviors. And we're going to frame that by talking about positive feedback and how important positive feedback is in teaching and maintaining students' expected behaviors. And then we're also going to share some strategies for effective positive feedback. So positive feedback, it's essential for learning. Feedback is essential for learning. And positive feedback can be used as a teaching tool as well as a strategy for encouraging the continued demonstration of school appropriate behaviors. Why do you all think that feedback is essential for learning? I want you to think about the fact that feedback is recognized as one of the most powerful influencers of students' academic and behavior learning. So 3 general forms of positive feedback can be tailored to fit the needs of different students in different situations. Behavior-specific praise, acknowledgement systems, and group contingencies. We're going to talk about behavior-specific praise and acknowledgement systems in this shared presentation, and I encourage you to continue and learn more information as well, also about group contingencies. So feedback are those events that follow behavior, and those events that follow behavior are going to make a behavior more or less likely to occur. So when the feedback that happens after a behavior, that is, for example, like behavior-specific praise or embedded in an acknowledgement system, what we're doing as teachers, what we're doing as educators is we're making sure that we're strengthening the likelihood of those behavior happening again. So we want that to be as positive as possible, and it's going to mark and encourage students to continue to demonstrate and to engage in those behaviors that have gotten them that positive feedback. Now we're going to talk about behavior-specific praise specifically and why behavior-specific praise is so powerful and how you can use it as a powerful tool to help support student behavior in your classroom. So behavior-specific praise is a positive statement that acknowledges what an individual or group of individuals has done well. All right, when it follows desired behaviors, it can make them more likely to occur in the future. So the more we focus on using behavior-specific praise with specific behaviors, we can make those behaviors more likely to occur in the future. And that means we're going to see more of that behavior in our classroom, and that it's going to become, something that we can expect and predict to happen. Now, behavior-specific praise should be 4 things. It should include 4 aspects, and I'm going to talk about those. Those are contingent and specific, positive, and considerate. So when we talk about contingent, I want you to think about the fact that it should be provided after the occurrence of an expected or desired behavior. As soon as possible is what is ideal. So immediately is ideal, right? So contingent is provided after the behavior immediately, and it's not provided after non-occurrences of the desired behavior. Now, if we look at specific, I bet you all can guess what that one means. Specific means that our behavior-specific praise explicitly describes what was observed. So that means you're taking the time to be specific and to give that information, those specific details about that behavior, so the student knows exactly what they did that is being recognized, that's being praised. Also, it's got to be positive. It focuses on what students are doing right. It focuses on what students are doing well. And also, we need to make our behavior-specific praise as considerate as possible. And that means that it suits the needs and the preferences of the individual, of the student, and the circumstances. We could consider maybe a student's preference related to attention. They like public or private praise, or maybe in front of a large group or a small group or just one-on-one. And we could also consider the skills of the behavior that the student is working to acquire. All right. And I want to draw you back to the fact that behavior-specific praise is often cited as one of the most powerful influencers of students' academic, social, and behavior learning. It's something we can easily carry with us in our pocket. We don't have to have any additional tools. We don't have to print out anything. We don't have to spend any extra money. We can use our time as teachers and as educators to provide behavior-specific praise to students. And that's going to have a huge impact on increasing the likelihood of them demonstrating and applying those behaviors in the future. So here are some examples of praise statements, behavior-specific praise statements. So the examples are positive, they're specific, and I want you to presume that they're delivered contingent on the desired behavior in a manner that considers the unique characteristics of the student. So in the elementary example, we have, you did a great job sitting quietly and listening for what to do next. And in the secondary example, we have nice organization. You've used the strategies we've discussed to improve your writing. I want to take a moment and talk about using behavior-specific praise. So behavior-specific praise can be used with all students to strengthen instruction on Tier 1 expectations. All right, so we're thinking about strengthening our instruction of those expectations that we defined in our classroom. Remember the matrix I showed you for those classroom activities like whole group, small group, and transition. And then also remember that expectation matrix I showed you that had some examples of support for self-regulation. So we're going to carry over behavior-specific praise to those expectations, and it's going to strengthen our own teaching and instruction on those Tier 1 expectations. Also, behavior-specific praise is a really simple way to strengthen student-teacher relationships and build and support a positive school and classroom climate. And we see this when we visit schools and support districts. The more behavior-specific praise that's happening, when it becomes a norm, it changes the whole climate of a school and certainly the climate of a classroom. So behavior-specific praise can also be used to prevent those situationally inappropriate behaviors, right, during key times in our class, possibly at key locations. Think about hallways, bathroom, cafeteria, and during difficult tasks. We can also use this praise to support those specific student needs, and we can use it in combination with other strategies to respond to situationally inappropriate behavior as they occur. So for me, it's one of those very simple strategies and techniques that I can combine and start to use expertly with other strategies in order to just support the Tier 1 needs that I see arise throughout a class. So a real quick resource spotlight. If you search on your phone, BE with this plus sign, positive, this is the Center on PBIS's app. And this is a tracking app that you can use it to set reminders, to acknowledge positive behavior, and to track positive feedback using the app. So if you're wanting to work on your rates of positive feedback, your rates of behavior-specific praise, you can use this app to do that. And they'll just give you a little prompt. Here's an additional resource spotlight. This is a resource you can download from the folder that I shared the QR code for earlier. This is a behavior-specific praise data collection tool, and it's just going to allow you to choose some behaviors, choose a student, choose a group, and monitor your use of behavior-specific praise. You could also use this if you're an instructional coach to monitor a colleague's use of praise and to help set goals for yourself, set goals for others, and just to provide that additional support and to think about what impact we see as we increase our behavior-specific praise in the classroom. Next, we're going to talk about behavior-specific praises, friend acknowledgement systems. And behavior-specific praise is a great place to start when we're providing positive feedback. And an acknowledgement system is going to be, a full fleshed out system where we're going to provide acknowledgement and positive feedback to students and groups of students at different levels in our classroom and our school. So first of all, an acknowledgement system is a structured approach. Typically, you might have a school have like an acknowledgement system, a guide or a manual or procedures, and it's going to be a structured approach to recognizing and reinforcing behaviors that align with those school-wide expectations that we talked about earlier. By structured, I mean that there is a deliberate database plan for acknowledging and giving students positive feedback. And everyone who's involved with the plan is going to understand what the implementation of that plan looks like. It is more structured than giving rewards out like just for fun or at the spur of the moment, or possibly like at a field day or a carnival. An acknowledgement system is going to be used throughout a school year, and with individual students, with groups of students, with grade levels, and then across school. So it's definitely more formal and involves different members of the school to support that plan. And then also, the system has those clear procedures for providing positive behavior feedback. And those procedures are linked to your school-wide expectations. They're used across settings and within the classroom. They're used by all your staff who interact with students. So we would think people who are you're in the hallways, if you're in the bathroom, if you're in the cafeteria, even as far as the buses, everyone who can be trained is trained in how to use the acknowledgement system. They're used equitably for all of our students, and they are created also with input from students at different grade levels and at different families, so that we make sure to keep the acknowledgement, right? The rewards that we're giving, the praise that we're giving, the focus that we're giving, keep that fresh, keep that rejuvenated. So it's engaging to everyone who's involved. So also, the system is going to allow for both planned and unplanned acknowledgements of student behavior. Planned could be as specific as, weekly, we're acknowledging a student by grade level or in a class focused on a certain behavioral goal for the week or for a grade level, looking at the data that we have and looking at possibly like discipline referrals or anecdotal data, and then thinking about things that we want to teach and behaviors in our classroom we want to reinforce in our school, using our school-wide expectations to focus and teach those behaviors, and then giving those planned acknowledgements of exemplary demonstration of those. And then also those unplanned acknowledgements. So catching students, right? Doing the right thing, catching students engaged in appropriate behaviors and letting them know that you recognize that and giving them that behavior specific praise tied to those expectations. And the system, the acknowledgement system itself recognizes that students have different preferences for acknowledgement, such as private and in public. And you're going to see in those planned and unplanned acknowledgements, you're going to see public and private acknowledgement and recognition as well. So I want you to think about how an acknowledgement system, it could include all of the following. It could include behavior-specific praise, absolutely. Some public displays of acknowledgement. Sometimes we see raffles, token economies, and group contingencies. And I'm going to talk a little bit further about these in depth. So a public display is when a student receives public recognition for meeting predetermined criteria. All right, and those examples of public recognition could include like a posted gotcha, possibly a student lanyard with school, like a school charm or a school mascot. And also we could give out recognition certificate, ticket, a plaque, just something that says, right, maybe on a board in the front office or on a TV where we're scrolling with images of things that are going on that are exciting in our school, just an opportunity to give that public display where a student sees their face or their name and they are being shouted out for, achieving, accomplishing, they're being acknowledged, right, for their behavior. And what's really fun about these public displays is getting involved with staff members and staff members, keeping this fresh and having ideas for how to do this. in a way that's going to be meaningful to your students and to your school. So another aspect of an acknowledgement system that you might see is going to be a raffle. So this would involve students getting tickets, and those tickets are usually those unplanned acknowledgements that are tied with behavior-specific praise. So students get tickets, and then those tickets are going to be put into, a pot, into a bowl. This could be at a class level, or it could be at a school-wide level. And then they're collected and then randomly drawn, right, for rewards. And those rewards could be, where students are picking out small tokens, small rewards from a classroom or a school store. And sometimes, those rewards could even be access to certain events, or, a choice of prizes that have been donated from the community. What you see with raffles is that, as they're used in classroom all the way to school level, that it's just really fun to get the community involved, to get families involved, and just to look for those areas to give positive feedback that's random and exciting, and that keeps students on their toes, and just finds those unlikely times to bring kids together to celebrate, and just to say, this is what happens in the positive climate that we've built in this school, is that, we have these times that are built in to just increase the amount of good things that are happening in our school. And they're just building that adherence to school-wide expectations so we can see more positive behavior. Now, you can also see token economies implemented in acknowledgement systems. So token economies are flexible and adaptable systems for reinforcing positive behavior. So I want to say that first. They're flexible and they're adaptable. So there's no one way to implement a token economy. Students receive tokens. So a token could be essentially like a ticket for demonstrating positive behaviors. And so it's also really important that when you're giving tokens or tickets, that you are acknowledging using behavior-specific praise why a student's receiving that token or a ticket. And that's why I started this section by saying that we want to start with behavior-specific praise, and then we add on our acknowledgement system. So a student receives tokens, right, for their positive behavior, and then those students have regular opportunities to exchange those tokens for rewards from a menu. And that reward menu can be as varied as makes sense, and is varied based on resources. So, you're going to vary that reward menu based on the age of students. If it's a classroom reward, we might see things like, small erasers, small fidget toys, maybe some markers or stickers. And then, we can build more diverse and more interesting reward menus, maybe at our school level or a grade level, especially as we get more resources from multiple classrooms or multiple families. It's just a fun way to make sure that the behavior-specific praise is tied to another tangible opportunity for students to receive a reward. It just makes it special, it makes it memorable, and it's just a great way to combine the raffles, the public displays, the behavior-specific praise with token economy. It all combines into one, package where across a school, the climate just is exceptionally positive and exceptionally reinforcing. Here are some token economy tips. First, just think that it should be important that the tokens are easy to carry and they're not easily duplicated, of course, and there's digital ways you can do this. Explicitly, you might need to teach students how and when they can earn and exchange tokens. So not in the middle of a lesson, possibly. Like there's good times and there's inappropriate times to use your tokens. I think this is possibly the most important one. It's ensuring that all students have the opportunities to earn tokens and access rewards, and that all aspects of an acknowledgement system, the public displays, the raffles, the token economy, that they include everyone, that every single student in your building has the opportunity to take part in the system and that something good can happen every single day to the students in your school and in your classroom. So also think about just providing tokens as soon as possible to really mark, right, and highlight that positive behavior. And it's just, the closer we tie positive feedback to the behavior, the stronger we're gonna increase the strength of that behavior and the predictability of it. And then always allow students to keep their earned tokens and don't use them in a demerit system to take tokens away. And then also think about preference assessments to inform reward options, but just think about talking to students at different grade levels and families, and just to keep those reward options fresh. And then there's certain places where you might want to fade access to rewards over time. I think it's more common to see like reward stores in classrooms, like at younger grades. And then sometimes the reward store might be faded as the grade advances. But we can also use rewards, just really regularly based on different behavior goals that we have for our class, based on needs that we see. So just, and overall, the tip I would give you is if something isn't working with a token economy, instead of throwing out the economy, think about what changes you can make so that it can work. So here is a resource spotlight I want to share. It is our resource pack. It's the Acknowledging Expected Behavior resource pack. And this pack includes explanations of various acknowledgement systems and ideas for reinforcing school appropriate behaviors at your school level, at the grade level, and at classroom level. And you can get that out of from the QR code in the folder that we shared. Also, another resource spotlight is the High School Acknowledgement System guide implementation brief from the Center on PBIS. So this is specifically for high school acknowledgement systems, and it has excellent ideas for incorporating student voice in the creation of an acknowledgement system. And that can be a powerful way to create student buy-in. Next, we are going to talk about pre-corrections. Now, remember, pre-corrections are going to be a preventative strategy you can use to prevent a challenging or problem behavior from occurring, to move a student away from that behavior. They're not a reactive strategy. So a reactive strategy would be like a correction. So pre-corrections fall in line with those preventative strategies that we want to use as much as possible. It's always more pleasant and better for a relationship with our students if we can prevent and be proactive versus reactive about problem behavior. So let's talk a little bit about pre-correction. So again, pre-correction is a proactive use of strategies to teach, remind our students, prompt them, and reinforce desired behaviors before challenging behavior occurs. Whereas corrections are used right after a challenging behavior occurs. I want to highlight the fact that pre-correction involves forward thinking. And as a teacher, as an educator, you are very adept at forward thinking because you need to predict what could go wrong. You need to think about what has happened in the past in similar situations, and you remember the pattern, you see the pattern emerging. So you're predicting what could go wrong. And so you're going to take steps to ensure instead that things go well. And one of the most powerful, easy strategies that we can carry in our pocket, again, right? We don't need extra funds. We don't need documents or worksheets. We can carry this in our pocket is pre-correction. So pre-correction is going to focus the student on what to do. It's going to focus them on what we need them to do instead of what not to do. So our pre-correction isn't telling them, don't do this. Our pre-correction is instead focusing on what to do. And therefore, it's going to support the acquisition of new, right, pro-social, positive skills that we want to see in our classroom and with our kids. With pre-corrections, right, the antecedents, or what occurs before expected challenging behaviors, are going to be changed a bit. And with corrections, the consequences of what is occurring after a challenging behavior is changed. So it's just really important that we think about the difference and that let's spend as much time as possible engaging in pre-correction versus correction. And when we use pre-correction, it's going to increase the student's time on task, and it's going to decrease those levels of challenging behavior. And that just creates and reinforces that positive environment we want to see in our classroom. So here's some pre-correction example. Mr. Rito notices a pattern of trash on the floor at the end of the day. He looks around, students have left, and there is trash on the floor every day. So to address the problem, he posts a sign that reads, "Keep your area clean." Think about how positive that statement is. Keep your area clean. And then he reminds his students each morning where to place trash. So these are all examples, right? We see multiple pre-corrections. We have the poster, now we have the reminder. He also changes the environment. He moves trash receptacles near the door, and that pre-correction is that physical reminder to correctly put your trash in the trash can versus on the floor. But then also think about why we start with behavior-specific praise in this presentation. He provides behavior-specific praise to students who meet his expectations. And he can do that one-on-one. He can also do it as a group. Thank you to everyone who put their trash in the trash can today. Thanks for reading the sign. Thanks for noticing the trash can. Thank you for doing that as I requested. The room is cleaner. It's better for everyone. And that's just a really great pre-correction example of how to address something that Mr. Rito had noticed, and you can follow this type of pre-correction with any problem you see arise in your class. So here's a resource spotlight. This is our pre-correction checklist. It can be used to evaluate the use of pre-correction, your use. You can also use it as a coach to observe and support a teacher. It outlines the steps of pre-correction and includes space for the rater to indicate whether the step was performed. All right, so this can be super useful. And also, I'm going to share the QR code again at the end of the presentation, the folder. Hopefully you're already in the folder and you're looking through those examples of resources. And here is a self-monitoring checklist. The self-monitoring checklist can be used to evaluate the use of pre-correction over time. And it outlines the steps of pre-correction. It includes space for the person who's rating it. So it might be the teacher themselves, or it might be a coach to indicate whether the step has been performed over multiple days. So as we continue talking about preventative practices, I want to talk about active supervision. So active supervision is the act of being alert and active in the classroom and engaging in a set of behaviors while you circulate, scan, and interact with students. And those behaviors are going to, as a teacher, you're going to help encourage students in those expected behaviors. And again, you're going to be preventing those challenging behaviors from arising. So active supervision involves moving, scanning, prompting, anticipating, and interacting. So by move, we mean literally move around the classroom. When teachers are teaching and moving around the classroom, it makes them more visible to students and in closer proximity to all students throughout those movements, so that all learners know that a teacher is coming by. It's a time that I can get help, but it's also just a physical reminder to stay focused on learning. Providing proximity is a good, flexible, less intensive approach to responding to challenging behaviors, right? And it promotes appropriate behaviors. Also, while you're moving, you're going to be scanning. So scan the setting, continuously see all students in the learning environment, and look at whole groups, look at small groups, and look at individual students, and think about across those changed activity structures, how your scanning is going to need to change. Especially think about at transition times, how scanning needs to be more focused so that we can actively supervise how students are interacting and moving during those times. So think about scanning, visually sweep the learning environment, and basically multitask between what students are doing and thinking about the work that you want to prompt them to do. So speaking of prompting, you want to, during this time as you're moving, as you're scanning, you want to prompt appropriate behavior. So all students need to understand the expectations that are needed for that learning time. So you might use pre-correction or prompts, and you might also put in some behavior-specific praise, and that can help prompt other students just to cue students what the appropriate behavior is for this expected activity, and to encourage students, right, to engage in appropriate behaviors. So during prompting, you might use cues or prompts in a variety of formats. I've seen teachers use, of course, visual cues and prompts, and then gestures, and then written or verbal, or like referencing or hand motioning to written or verbal cues. Then that can help address possible challenging behaviors. And then think about anticipating. So anticipate, right? Those you need to see into the future, those problematic situations. This relates to you just prompting and providing pre-corrections, anticipating when a problem may occur. And in relation to the directions of the instruction, you might want to consider where academic frustration could occur or where challenging or problem behaviors may pop up. And then when you anticipate it, it is easier to provide prompts that will avoid it. And then, of course, including interaction. So just providing students with feedback continuously, and that includes positive feedback. And then sometimes that interaction will need to involve corrective feedback as well. So positive feedback can be given for both, our academic and behavioral outcomes in the form of behavior-specific praise, but we also might need to add some corrective feedback for what's going on in the classroom, for the academic skills and for the behaviors that we need to see. And that's just letting students know what they need to do to correct the behavior, and we can keep that positive. So here is a simple method to help you think about your classroom, just to ensure that active supervision takes place in all of the parts of your classroom. So just consider the 4-quadrant method and consider if there's any areas in your space where students can hide or where you're not able to get to as easily, and think about, circulating there as often as possible. I also, when I think about the 4-quadrant method, sometimes I know it's an area where it's just not conducive. Like a lot of students are in an area that's not conducive to learning or can lead to more problems. So that's when I might want to change the arrangement of my classroom space a bit, or remove an obstacle, or remove some area, or change it so that I can get there and so that students can be supported with, prompting and scanning and interaction. Here is a resource spotlight for active supervision. It's a strategy checkup. It's a checklist that can be used to evaluate the use of active supervision. There are 9 characteristics of effective active supervision. You can use it to evaluate your own use, and you can also use it as an observation tool. Now we are going to talk about opportunities to respond. And in the classroom, the teacher's use of opportunities to respond can greatly increase student engagement and engagement with academic skills and academic learning, therefore decreasing the time that students have to engage in problem and challenging behaviors. And that's why we've included it today. So opportunities to respond. What is an OTR? That's going to be anytime a teacher offers an instructional question, right, a statement or a gesture, and that question is going to be posed to our students, and it's going to elicit an academic response and then be followed by feedback. So I want you to think about the 3 circles. So a teacher presents a question, right, inquiry or task, the student responds, and then the teacher provides praise or feedback. So opportunities to respond are defined as behaviors that require student responses and are followed by feedback. So it's really important that the feedback occur and that the student knows if their response was on target, and gets feedback, praise for those correct responses, and then feedback about responses that need further support. So OTRs, I want you to think about this. They can be delivered by peers as well as teachers. They can also be delivered sometimes via technology. So students can respond in a variety of ways, and I'm going to talk about those on the next slide. And those are a variety of verbal and nonverbal ways. And it's important to keep those responses, in a variety of ways so that students are as engaged as possible. And also with OTRs, a teacher is requesting students give an overt response. The overt response can be verbal or nonverbal, but it's still overt and that the teacher is able to provide feedback. And so it's not something that's just happening in the student's head. It's not something that they're just thinking about. While they should be given time to think about it, it's really important that they share and demonstrate their response in some way so that the teacher can provide praise and feedback. So students can share their response out loud, they can share it with a peer, they can write it, right? They can demonstrate it and they can show it. But what we want to make sure is that the teacher is able to give feedback to it. And I really want you to think about how important it is to have a high rate of opportunities to respond and why that leads to more engagement in your classroom and fewer incidences of behavior problems occurring. And it's kind of simple to think about. When we are engaged in an OTR, when a student is engaged in responding to a question, they are literally strengthening their brain muscle in that skill. And so as their brain muscle gets stronger, they are going to, be able to receive that positive feedback and they're going to feel better, right, about their response and about the skill that they're learning. So the more OTRs that we have, the stronger that brain is going to get, and the more repetitions it's going to get in that skill. And it's just going to lead to better outcomes in your classroom. So really thinking about when you're thinking, behavior specific praise, as we started the presentation with, tying that behavior specific praise over here to our opportunities to respond. So here are some response types, and these include verbal and nonverbal. So those verbal ones are spoken, and then we have our nonverbal. So we have our written and our action. And nonverbal in this case, I just mean as, we didn't say it out loud, but I know that written has a verbal aspect to it. But let's look at some different ways we could use spoken responses. So in spoken responses, we could, of course, use the most traditional way for an OTR to occur would be like an individual response, so calling on individual students. But then also think about choral responses and getting everyone to say in unison. All students respond in unison, and what's great about choral responses is that creates repetition of a key idea or term, and we can have 100% of our students responding at any one time in a choral response, and that's a high level of engagement. Also think about in spoken responses, we can do those at higher rates with our peer-to-peer and small group responses. So think about maybe just like a think, pair, share, or a round robin, or a numbered heads together strategy. So, during a peer-to-peer, one student, right, is usually talking at one time and another student's listening. Sometimes one student can serve even as a tutor in our think, pair, share, for example. So this is a great example of a strategy where we are going to make those OTR responses even more powerful because they're going to be able to be met with feedback from the peer and from the small group. Now, with written responses, we can use whiteboards. I commonly have seen whiteboards used in math. I love seeing whiteboards used in science and social studies and history and English because it just allows a place for all students to record a response, and then their thinking is displayed overtly, and the teacher can walk around and look at the whiteboards, get a sense of student responses, and then know how to respond to a whole class or to individual students with praise, with correction, and just get a really good sense, like an informal assessment type sense of how students are responding and what to do because of that. And then also guided notes where teachers can provide students with, printed copies of notes with key pieces of information missing, and then help them record answers, help them put in key information and kind of highlight concepts and facts. And then as the lesson progresses, students continue to fill out the handout, and then we can use the guided notes to target questions that we want to ask, and students can more easily respond to OTRs and just feel that success and momentum build with the academic skill that's being focused on. And then an exit ticket, those are prompts where students complete them at the end of class and maybe reflect on a lesson. Just make sure as a teacher that you're leaving enough time for students to get feedback on their exit slips. Try not to wait until the next day. Collect the exit slips, have 2 to 3 minutes, scan them, and then give feedback. Now, active action responses, we can, use gestures where all students have a chance to respond at the same time, maybe with a thumbs up or a thumbs down or a high five or a peace sign. There's so many different ways you can support and really train students to use. I've seen teachers use gestures for many, many different types of responses, and it can be a really powerful way where everyone can be involved really quickly. And then, in response cards, that includes slips of paper or signs or other items that students hold up in the air to give their response during instruction. They can indicate their choice, and then you can share feedback, peers can share feedback. And so those response cards just can make feedback for all students more seamless and quicker. And then often now we're seeing the use of technology tools and aids, like for clickers, for example, where students press a number or a button and then get really automatic feedback or feedback for a whole group once everyone has entered a response. And these are just great ways to keep things really fresh. And what I want you to really think about with response types is it's really important that students have a variety of opportunities throughout a lesson. So it's just exceptionally important that we don't rely on one single response type or one OTR throughout our lesson, that we have a variety of response types and that students are asked a variety of questions throughout the lesson so that engagement is as high as possible. And then students are going to be less engaged with problem behavior. Now we're going to move from the prevention and proactive focus of this presentation and talk about how to respond to instructionally challenging behavior, right? So how we should respond in an instructional way to problem behaviors that occur in the classroom. So responses to challenging behavior should be instructional. And that means that they should focus on teaching, and they should focus on the students learning and building new behavioral skills so that we can see success in how students engage and learn in the classroom. In order to make that, happen, we need our responses to students and their challenging behavior to focus on building skills in our students. So teaching and supporting those school appropriate and social behaviors. They need to be respectful responses. So sometimes I've noticed, teachers, they might engage in a response and they might show some level of sarcasm, and students pick up on that. So making sure that we are as respectful as possible. They should be relationally based so that students feel safe and supported. They should be logically connected to the behavior, all right? They need to be reasonable, so practical and well thought out under the given circumstances. The response needs to match the severity of the behavior. Sometimes frustration can build as other behaviors occur, and then a small behavior might occur, and then the severity of the response doesn't match the actual behavior. So just making sure you keep the response congruent to the severity of the behavior. They should be delivered fairly without favoritism, and consideration should be given to equity and equal opportunities for all of our students in the classroom. So being as fair as possible. And you know that students will let you know if you're not being fair, if the perception is there that you're not fair. So I think that's why we should think about the other, features that we've shared, like respect. and logically connected and match the severity, and that will help with fairness. And then, age and developmentally appropriate for the student's age. We're going to respond in a way that matches that. And then as timely as possible. So responding in a time manner that makes sense based on the behavior, and as soon as possible is the suggestion that we're going to give you guys. So a school-wide discipline plan is a plan that can support your responses to inappropriate and the problem behavior, and also responding with that instructional goal in mind. So what is a school-wide discipline plan? It's a plan that describes a school's comprehensive and systematic approach to promoting positive student behavior, and it addresses discipline issues throughout the school. So just remember that school-wide discipline plan is going to promote positive student behavior. And how's it going to do that? It's going to ensure that students and families and staff understand the school's approach to discipline. It's going to ensure all stakeholders receive clear and consistent messages. It's going to reduce confusion. It's going to promote fairness. It's going to promote shared responsibility for maintaining that very important, productive, and positive learning environment. And it's going to ensure consistent and uniform responses to common challenges and collaboration among stakeholders. Also, a school-wide discipline plan should describe your school's approach to teaching expected behaviors and preventing those challenging behaviors. It should identify and define challenging behaviors that are going to be addressed, and it should indicate who is responsible for addressing the defined behaviors. Is it faculty and staff? Is it administrators? And it's also going to describe a continuum of potential consequences, right, for those challenging behaviors, and the decision-making that's going to be informed by data along that continuum. So school-wide data play a crucial role in the development, implementation, and evaluation of a school-wide discipline plan. So just like we talked about at the very beginning of this presentation with database decision-making, we want our discipline decisions in our discipline plan to use data-informed decisions. So we should use data to inform our plan development. School-wide data should provide insight into the types and frequency of problem behaviors occurring with a school, helping schools identify and address areas of concern. It can also reveal issues related to school climate, student buy-in, and stakeholder preferences. Our data-informed decisions are going to help evaluate the effectiveness of Tier 1. So by collecting and analyzing data, schools can assess the effectiveness of their universal supports and determine whether adjustments are needed. And data can also reveal patterns of disparities in how discipline policies are applied across different groups. Also, we can use school-wide data to identify our at-risk students, right? Kind of a heat map. And our data can help identify students who may benefit from additional support. And it can also help us decide to allocate resources and change the way that we are supporting and training staff. So data can provide an objective basis for making informed decisions about resource allocation and staff training needs. And all of this is going to lead to better responses to student problem behavior, and then more consideration in how we teach students through this system and how we support students so that they're able to come back to the classroom and re-engage in learning. Here is a group of low-intensity reactive strategies. And what I like, again, about these types of strategies is I love strategies you can carry in your pocket. So in general, these are strategies that don't require extra funds or extra preparation, but these are skills and strategies that you can work on and support as a coach your teachers in. So the strategies are, the ignore, attend, praise strategy. So that means we intentionally ignore a minor challenging behavior. And instead of focusing on the challenging behavior and naming and highlighting that, we attend to as a teacher and praise desired behaviors. All right. So we ignore, we attend, we praise the desired behavior. So also another low intensity reactive strategy is to redirect students by shifting attention away from those people or activities that are competing with the behavior that we want to see, and instead getting that student redirected or directed toward the desired people or activities, whatever the focus is. So redirection. Offering choices is a great way to react to a problem behavior by providing options for demonstrating the desired behavior. And typically when you're giving students choice, both of those choices are meant to be something that as a teacher you want to see. But by providing any level of choice, you're giving the student some command in what's happening, and it's just going to build some momentum and increase the likelihood that they're going to take up one of those choices instead of engaging like in a power struggle. So offering that choice in that moment is going to step away from a possible power struggle. And then again, reteaching, right? So I talked about that when we were talking about tier 1 school-wide expectations, that it's really important to reteach. So as we see the increase of any particular problem behavior, it should prompt us, remind us as a teacher that it's important to reteach to an individual student, to a group of students, by telling and modeling how to meet expectations, and then to even let students practice once again, and then to be able to get that behavior-specific praise and to create that positive support. So here is our resource spotlight. This isn't a resource pack. This is a brand new module that our project created. So we have developed a comprehensive module on strategies to prevent and respond to challenging behavior. And this is actually now available on our website, and you would click Start Course, and you can begin that course, and you can do this asynchronously, step by step. You could also use this like as a study and learn with like a PLC or an SLC and go through different parts of the module and just, you know, take a deep dive with some of those reactive strategies that I just shared and just took a little peek at. So again, we've reached the end of our presentation. So I want to give you just a moment to have access the opportunity for our spotlighted resources. So scan the QR code. When you're prompted, create the free account, and then just download that entire folder. The many checklists and resource packs and implementation guides that were shared are in that folder, and then you can use them as you need to, as a teacher, to self-reflect, and then you can also use them as a coach to support teachers in your building. Okay. And if you're looking for a way to connect with us, you can connect with us on our website. You can scan and sign up to receive our newsletter, and then you can connect with us on social media. And then by wrapping up, you can email questions to TennesseeTSC@vanderbilt.edu. Thanks for joining us today, and that is the end of our session. Thanks so much.